Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So today I'm just going to be continuing on doing a little Q&A. I've just been slowly kind of working through some questions that you guys sent in. I've been having a lot of fun answering them. We'll just see what's there. It's not like I've really planned what questions I'm going to answer. First question is, what's the best and worst piece of writing advice you've ever been given? The writing advice that has honestly benefited my writing the most is just like specificity. Like, it's so simple, but just be specific. Focusing on creating a specific character who like really then feels alive on the page. In terms of descriptive prose, focusing on specificity really helped me actually whittle out purple prose, where I was focusing too much on how I was describing things and then instead focusing on what I was describing. In terms of like emotion and theme, not thinking about what is a universal thing I want to say, but instead what is the specific experience that I'm depicting in this story. The writing advice that I think is the worst is anything that frames writing in absolutes. Anything that demonizes certain craft techniques just because it's not that person's personal taste. The beauty of writing is that it's not a science. The craft element can be kind of theoretical, and that can be really, really fun to explore, and that's awesome. And in a way, like, I get it, because like I love being like, oh, is this the science of writing? I think it's better to view it as like, this is some theory, but it's not like an equation. You need this, and you will have a good book. Like, if everyone did that and that's how we all wrote books, every book would be so boring. Like, what's so amazing about writing is that it can be completely infinite and we can create infinite things. There's not one specific thing, but I think that that's the type of writing advice that I'm like, I don't usually enjoy. I always get questions on subplots, and it reminds me that at some point I have to make a video on subplots. So I got a question here, how to add subplots and how to properly integrate and intertwine them with the main plot. I don't, in my own writing, think of subplots, and here's why. To me, everything that happens in the book is the main plot. You just have maybe different threads, but they're all manifestations of the plot. They're all manifestations of the same concept, and they all intertwine to create that cohesive story in the end. So personally, I don't like to think of subplots as a thing. Like, I don't really believe in subplots in my own work, because the idea that you have the main plot and then you have some little side plots that are happening that are tied to the main plot, but like they're separate. To me, none of it is separate. Everything intertwines, and I think that that's what novels are. They're these many threads that tie together. So my first advice is, don't think of them as subplots. Think of them as just the many threads of the main plot. Like, the threads of your story should braid in a way where they do all impact each other, and so that's why I like to think of just, I have the main plot and the various threads that make up the plot. Some of them may take up more narrative precedence because they may need more time on the page. It's way easier to think about how they all intertwine if you're like, this is my book and all the threads that make up my book. If you have a thread that you can't get it to impact the others, where events happening in that thread never intersect, either direct crossover or like they're running alongside each other and what's happening here is sparking over here and what's happening over here is like sparking over here, then maybe it's not actually part of the story. Yeah, I always like to think about the book being like weaving between these many threads that are all like sparking off of each other and kind of creating potential energy. And with a novel, you can have a bunch of threads and they can start to diverge, but constantly think about tying. How what's happening in one thread is in an increase to the tension in another thread. What are your thoughts on writing slowly and exploring the story, setting, and characters as one is writing? How do you remove the feeling of regret as a writer when you feel as if you were not writing enough? This is basically a description of my writing process. So my thoughts on this are, this is how I write. Like, I like to just write and explore as I write. There isn't like an easy way to get over this, but you just have to like accept that writing speed has nothing to do with skill or quality. I used to really think this. I used to be like, the faster I could write, that meant that I was a better writer. Not true at all. For me, I found a happy medium. It's different for every book, but really learning to take my time. Like, for me, I take a lot of time in editing, and this is just something I've accepted about myself. Feel like a story, it's like a fine wine, over those years of on and off editing, it really matures in the time between, sometimes a very long time in between drafts, and then when I come back to it, there's that extra level of maturity that I can then add, that like richness, depth of flavor. That's just something that I've learned is important for me, to have these really long periods in between drafts. I kind of know the book is done when it stops maturing in between drafts. I mitigate that by just writing a lot of books at the same time. So I have a bunch of things in the work all kind of at different stages of maturing, There's nothing wrong with having a slower writing process. It doesn't mean a lack of skill. I struggle with writing characters and recently rewatched one of your videos about that topic where you mentioned more complex psychology. Do you know of any particular psychology topic that might be worth delving into that could be helpful in the endeavor? I feel like I just need to understand humans more. When you are thinking about complex psychology in terms of your characters, I don't necessarily think you have to be thinking about the concepts of psychology. I took some psychology classes in university. I don't feel like they benefited my writing as much as I was expecting them to. I remember going into Psych 100 and being like, this is going to be so helpful for my writing. And maybe it's just because it was like a 100 level class. I didn't feel like it benefited. Like, I'm sure it was useful, but it actually didn't really. I took like several psych classes, and I don't think, maybe there's only been 1 or 2 times where I've consciously drawn from those. I don't necessarily think, I mean, it could help. I'm not saying it's bad. My main piece of advice, if you want to create more complex psychology, let go of an idea of cleanness. It often really helps to embrace messiness. People are messy. They're complicated. They're really complicated. And I think if you start using yourself as a reference point, you can start to pick up on this. If you notice yourself having some weird, messy, complicated, maybe contradictory emotions or feelings about something, this is why people spend years and years and years in therapy getting to the root of a single issue. People are just deeply complex. It's one of those things that it's easy to accept in real life. Oh yeah, people are really, really complicated, and so many things go into how we feel about stuff and our experiences. That's really easy to accept, I think, in real life. But it's hard on the page because it's like, how do I translate that to the page, right? How am I supposed to translate that? How am I supposed to make someone feel that complex on the page? I think on the page, there's this desire to be able to neatly connect A to B. The character's like this because of this. They're like this because of this. Instead of thinking about clean connections, think about how those connections can actually make the character messier. Instead of going, okay, this thing happened, that's why they're like this, which is simplifying, think about how that can actually complicate a psychological detail. So instead of it being, this thing happened in their past, which is why they're like this, it's, this thing happened in their past, which makes them feel all these million different ways, and it's evolved into maybe these kind of contradictory beliefs and all these different wants and desires. Think less about explaining the psychology and more about complicating the psychology. So when you have that ability to make a connection between why a character feels the way they feel or why they act the way they act or believe whatever, instead of thinking, how can I tie this back to a simple answer, think about, how can I trace these many threads of complication? And don't be afraid to lean into that. Like, lean into that complicatedness. There may be things that can't be easily reconciled. Pretty much everyone has that. We are complicated creatures, and we can't just neatly reconcile every parts of ourselves. You know, we can't always explain why we feel the way we feel or trace it back to a single thing that happened to us. So yeah, I think when you're making those connections between like concrete things that happen to the character and their psychology, instead of thinking about it being an answer, thinking about it in the opposite way. Like, instead it's posing many, many questions. Instead of it being simplifying, it's actually complicating. Resist the urge to simplify their psychology and instead take those opportunities as the opportunity to complicate. You've mentioned before a desire to teach writing one day. If that's still something you desire, how would you approach it as a teacher? Would it be a lot like the teaching you received post-secondary, or would you make changes to how you were taught, etc.? Teaching is probably like my dream job. Being able to teach writing is probably my dream job because I love writing craft and I love getting to work with people on their stories. I think there are definitely a lot of things that I would do similarly, that I would take from how I was taught, but then I would also definitely adapt it based on my own philosophy. You know, I had a lot of different writing instructors through university, and I can take things from all of them that I'm like, oh, you did this really well, you did this really well, just based on my experience as a student and what I really felt helped me learn. I think some of the workshops that I had, despite the fact that maybe I really liked how they were set up, there was a certain encouraging to be very harsh at certain points. We workshopped very hard, and it might have just been the cohort that I had. We were very gung-ho, and we would workshop real hard. Like, there was this one time where the prof wasn't there, so we had a TA fill in, and she was like, yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and supervise. You guys know what you're doing. Go ahead, workshop. After the first story, she was like, oh my God, like, you guys workshop really hard. Like, I would not want to be in this class. Like, this is like the most intense workshop I've ever seen. And like, she was an MFA student. She was like, I've never seen I've never seen workshops this intense before. Maybe some of the culture of my university program at the time was quite intense and really did breed a certain level of intensity that I think was in some ways really enriching, and I'm thankful for it, but in other ways it was like quite high pressure. I definitely would want to put a focus on like developing the work before a grade and, you know, really thinking about creating like a holistically strong story rather than maybe trying to hit points on a grading rubric. Really trying to think about grading in terms of like, oh, in a way that encourages writing the story that you want to write, even if it's maybe unconventional. Like, you know, like, how are we going to grade a story that's maybe very unconventionally structured? That shouldn't be something that I think a student should be afraid to write. So the program that I went through I had the last year of these two senior profs who had been in the department for like decades. And after me, they both retired, and the program changed dramatically. Like, I know people who were a year or two below me, and they had such a different university experience, way less intense, and the grading was way softer. I was talking to like an MFA student at the school who's there now, and is like, yeah, basically now to get an A, you have to hand in something typo-free and coherent, mostly typo-free and coherent. And I was like, when I was there, the word transcendent was in the grading rubric. I had profs who had been there doing it for a long time, and there was a lot that they had figured out, but maybe at the same time were teaching from some older mindsets about what fiction should be, coming at it from a different generation's perspective that I would change in terms of like the philosophy maybe, and maybe the culture around it. But I think in terms of like the actual logistics of how the workshop was set up, I think that the profs I had, they'd been teaching for a long time, they had it really well figured out. It would be a combination, I think. So many people have really negative experiences with writing workshops, but I had really positive ones, and so they helped me so much as a writer more than anything else. And so I feel like I've learned so much about having good workshop experiences combined with maybe some negative experiences that can show me what not to do. Really think that workshopping can be such a beneficial and amazing experience. I would not trade my workshopping experiences that I had in university for anything. Like, helps me grow as a writer more than anything else. But I think 90% of people have neutral to negative experiences with writing workshops. So they're clearly something that's very hard to get right. I have a question. My friend is a teen writer who's very scared to show her work to her parents and friends. What is some good advice I could give to help her overcome this fear? What I would say to your friend is tell her that she doesn't have to share her work with her parents and friends. If she doesn't feel ready, she just doesn't have to do it. Sharing your work is vulnerable, especially if you're a teenager. You know, you're young, it can feel really scary. You know, I think a lot of teen writers like to explore maybe darker topics in their work because being a teenager is a very complicated time, and you're making sense of the world, and everything you're going through, you're probably going through for the first time ever. When you're a writer as a teenager, you explore a lot of that in your writing. I have been a teen writer, and I've known a lot of teen writers. I have never met a teen writer who didn't describe their work as like really dark. Every teen writer basically is like, my work is really dark, and I explore really dark things in my writing. And I'm not saying that to like discredit them, because I think that that's often true. Teenagers often do write about dark stuff because either they've gone through it in real life and don't yet have the skills to process it, so they're going to process it through their writing, or they've learned that this exists, so they're drawn to writing about it because that's how they're learning about the world. That's really normal, and I actually think it's healthy. The reaction from adults is usually, this is too dark for your age. Well, is it too dark if pretty much every single teenager who writes is writing about these things, and the ones who don't are probably thinking about these things, or maybe experiencing them and just not writing about it. But as a result, as a teenager, I think there's this, often the work feels so vulnerable and you're scared to show it, especially if you feel, or if the response has been in the past, that this is too dark, why are you thinking about these things? So what I would say to your friend who's a teenager is just tell her, like, she doesn't have to share her work if she's not ready. And when she wants to share her work, she can just share it with the people that she's comfortable sharing it with. The important thing to do to support someone who's at that age who's writing is to let them know that it's okay for their work to be private, not push them to share their work if they're not ready to. I have to share this question. This is not about writing, but this is actually so wholesome. I love your outfits. Can you share where you buy Hawaiian shirts? They are awesome. You have the best taste in clothing I've ever seen in any female. You make me interested in fashion as a guy. This is so wholesome. This is what man and lesbian solidarity should look like. Instead of being mad that I don't dress for the male gaze or making gross comments, it's, where do you buy your Hawaiian shirts? And you know what? I don't think most people would think that I have great fashion sense. Of course a guy would think that I have good fashion sense because I mostly wear men's clothing. Unfortunately, the answer to that is that I mostly thrift them. I thrift like probably 90% of my clothes for like sustainability reasons, and also I just think thrifted clothing like is really cool. You can find the coolest pieces. This one actually wasn't thrifted. I got this from Aphens. Thank you for complimenting my style. You know, I had no style points when I was younger. Did not know how to dress myself, and then I think over the past few years I've actually like figured out how to dress myself and dress in a way that I like feel confident. You missed a few chapters, friend. Did you ever struggle so hard with a book that you had to begin from scratch? Yeah, I've done this a couple times. So there are a few books that I wrote when I was a teenager that I think just because I was young it was clear that if I ever wanted to pursue the book, I would have to rewrite it. But the big one was with the book I'm Fine / Holding a Ghost. When I was 18, I wrote a book called I'm Fine. It was a young adult contemporary book, and it was really special to me. Like, it was the book of my heart. It came from a really personal place. I was like, this is gonna be it. I'm gonna publish it. I really thought this was the one. I was trying to revise the book over the following year, and I could not get it to work. I ended up rewriting it over one summer, like literally rewriting the whole thing. And it's weird, I completely forget that I did that. But yeah, I rewrote the whole book. And after completely rewriting it, I was like, why is this not better? It's still bad. I was like, I don't know, maybe I have to shelve it. I had some big realizations about the character, like that she was a big old gay. Like myself, maybe? I was at the point where I was like, I think I have to let this book go. I've put in my time. I've done so many drafts, I can't get it to work. I had this idea that I could just completely rewrite it, like take the character and rewrite the whole thing in a completely different situation. The genre would be different, everything would be different, the setting would be different, and the same character. But I had learned so much about her at the time, and really, I think, figured out some stuff that really was important to understanding her and what her story was meant to be. And so then I started rewriting this new version of the book, which I consider just a completely different book, to be honest. It just has the same main character. And I got 20,000 words in, and I was like, this is a hot mess, and it doesn't have the feeling that it's supposed to have. And so I realized that I had to lean into the experimental aspect of it more and make it a lot more experimental. So I restarted it again. So that was one book, which was kind of two books, that got written, edited a bunch, rewritten, written as another book, and then restarted. And then eventually finished the book. Any small tips for threading thematic themes in stories, especially fantasy novels, while balancing with the plot and character? I think a big theme mishap that is really easy to make and understand is that really forget how theme is happening through the story. Basically, your theme is an idea that is being explored through the concrete. So you have this idea, and through what actually happens in the story, you're exploring that. It's not just, carefully sprinkled over the story as a little dusting that maybe is referenced every so often. We can view the actual things that happen, the concrete plot, as a case study of this theme. It's not necessarily the singular answer. It's not like this is always what happens. This is the singular answer to this question. But it's a case study on this topic, and it's exploring how these themes could evolve. So I think the secret in any genre when you're thinking about theme is thinking about what am I actually expressing through the events and through my character's choices especially. Sometimes there is some literal unpacking of the theme to go alongside that. But the base of it is what am I just literally showing through what happens. And you don't want to think about your characters as these like chess pieces just to explore a theme. First and foremost, they are characters in a story, living people, right? But if there are themes you want to explore, thinking about what the story is literally saying about those themes, and if that aligns with what you actually want the story to be saying, what ideas are explored through what is literally happening. So yeah, look at what literally is happening. How do I get over the fear of editing? I always worry that I'm making the story worse when I try to fix problems, and I feel like my skill as an editor will never compare to the quality of writing I can achieve when I'm drafting. I do relate this. I've been there. I was really scared to edit for a while. I got over my fear of editing by just editing. This is obvious, but save your old drafts. Save every draft. This was really important for me when I was going into doing big edits for the first time, saying to myself, you can always go back. Work on this for a month or so, and if you feel like after that point you've made it worse, you can go back. The old draft still exists. You have that safety net. And you know what? I've never had to go back. And the second thing I would say is, I consider myself a discovery writer, and my writing process is very fluid and intuitive and whatnot. Not when it comes to editing. When it comes to editing, I am charts, maps, plans, outlines, because I need that to feel confident. I'm such a confident drafter. I don't really need any outside tools. Editing, I'm not confident. So I need it to be laid out scene by scene by scene, exactly what I need to do. And that just, I found really helped was make this really detailed outline for your edits of, instead of being okay, I have this problem that I have to fix and now I'm gonna go fix it. What is that gonna mean in every single scene? And then you can literally just tackle it one scene at a time, and that makes it way less overwhelming. And then the third thing I would say is because this was a mistake. The first time I went to go do a big developmental edit, I think I was viewing it as the only draft I was ever going to do. In my brain, I was like, I maybe will never edit this book. I have to fix everything. And that's not how it is. Editing happens in layers. You don't have to fix every single thing. That can be so overwhelming and it can make the draft so intensive. So focus on fixing a few issues, and then with each subsequent draft, it will get easier and easier to fix the remaining things. And I would also just accept that it is going to get worse before it gets better, right? Sometimes with editing, you have to break and reset some bones. You have to tear down some walls, and it's like renovating a house, right? Like, let's say you build a house and it's kind of shoddy in a couple places. It's a bit wonky, but at least it's a functioning house and it looks like a house, even if when you go inside, maybe in some places, it's not up to code. So then to fix it, you may have to tear down some walls and get into like the guts of the house, and it's gonna look worse, right? Because your first draft was in some way a full book, and suddenly you're maybe gonna gut some aspects of it and you're gonna take out scenes and it's not really gonna be a coherent book anymore, and you're gonna be like, oh my god, I made it so much worse. So you keep working on it as you reassemble the pieces. The skies will clear and you will have a much more functional book that is better than before. But I think that interim stage can scare off a lot of writers. I totally get what you're describing, because I felt that before when I was editing a book. This, oh my god, I made it worse moment, you're probably going to make it worse. But then you're going to make it even better. So it's okay. How do you decide which stories to submit to contests and which stories to generally submit? Are there qualities a story can have to make it contest worthy? This, I think, is an interesting question. A lot of the time, contests, I will write stories for the contest. Basically, because I kind of will use contests as deadlines a lot of the time. I'll submit a story to a contest first, and then after that, I'll just generally submit it. I don't honestly submit to many contests because the fees are so high. There is what they call in the Lit Mag sphere contest sparkle, and it's kind of the idea that stories that win contests are often a little flashier. If a story is really subtle and quiet, I probably am not going to submit it to a contest because it's probably not going to stand out against more flashy experimental pieces. But in the general slush pile, where it doesn't have to be the singular shining star, it just has to resonate with the editor, I think they have a better shot. Whereas I think with contest, a story that has that pop to it. Weird, but not in a way that it's hard to maybe like wrap your mind around. I think that those are the best for contests. But I, to be honest, don't really submit to contests very much. So I'm gonna close off this video now. I still have more questions. I thought this was only gonna be 3 parts, but I literally still have more questions, so I don't know, maybe I'll keep doing it. We'll see. Okay, so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.